So I'm going to be talking about this rather long-winded title, Perceptions and Expectations of Rehab and Recovery Following Acquired Brain Injury. This is my PhD study. So what I wanted to do over the next 10 minutes or less is just outline what my aims were, a little bit on methodology and participants, mainly on the findings, and then a proposed framework from that. And it follows on very nicely from the ABI in children. I work in with adult ABI. I work both as a speech and language therapist and also as a counsellor in that service. And the starting point for this, so it's very much not discipline specific. I'm really looking at rehabilitation here. And we're interested, and I suspect you all find this regardless of what patient group you work with or client group you work with, is that question, why do some people engage and some people not engage? And I think that, I don't know, in my experience over many years, there's a bit of a tendency to dismiss the people who won't engage and to think, well, we can't put our efforts in there because they're not engaging. They're not motivated, is the term I hear most often. And I started to think a bit more about, well, what's beneath that, because it's not impairment specific necessarily. And I wanted to look at this, and I thought the starting point to do that was about finding out more about the perception of the individual, the client. So to understand more about where they're coming from, rather than putting my professional assumptions onto them and saying, well, this is what they ought to do in order for me to think they're motivated and they're engaged. So to find a bit more about what they expected. But I also wanted to, as a specific aim, to try and find a framework or a model that I could use to look at whether there is change to clinical practice that might encourage or help get that engagement more effectively. So this I don't need to repeat because it's already been said for the paediatric service, but this is the group that I'm working with. So ABI, stroke, traumatic, and then the encephalitis and so on. I think it's really important. This is a qualitative piece of research, so there's no assumption that you can generalise from it. But in order to know whether any of the findings are transferable to another context, it's really important to know the context the research was in. So I've just put this up. We're a highly specialist community rehabilitation service. We only see adults who are deemed to have complex problems. That might be a single issue of particular complexity, or it might be a range of problems, so somebody who's got cognitive problems and physical problems, social problems, which creates the complexity. It's county-wide. We're in Suffolk. It's a predominantly rural county, I would say. People who live in Ipswich say Ipswich is but it's a predominantly rural county. And in 2011, 89% population British white. So from that, you're going to say this is probably not transferable as it is into a lot of inner city areas, but it's worth playing about with it and seeing whether it does work in those settings. So I used a qualitative methodology, and I specifically chose grounded theory because it explicitly sets out to create a model or a framework, and that's what I wanted to do. Any of you, and I know there's one qualitative research already, I mean, such a headache. There are so many different things you can take, and I think in the end you sort of do a bit of that. But this does explicitly plan to create a framework or a model. I've just put this up because I do think we're a little bit clinically, we think all the time about evidence-based and statistical proof of things, and I think there is a danger that we lose the individual in that. And coming at it from this perspective of the client, I hope that we get round that. But I just really like this quote as a clinician in terms of looking at what's underneath the statistics for the individual client. So the method I used was I wanted this to be prospective, and there was no research that I found that was prospective. And as a community service, I wanted to not let people go through our process and then go back and say retrospectively, what did you think, what were your expectations, because that changes everything. So I interviewed people after they'd been discharged from the acute service, but before we started seeing them in the community service, so that I could get a sense of what are their expectations then, before they engage or don't engage with us. I did in-depth interviews and then followed the process of an analysis. I did have a second researcher check some of them, and I've just put focus group there because I also, another thread of the research was a focus group looking at clinicians' views against the client views, which was very interesting but not for today. Well, interesting to me. So I had 21 participants, which doesn't sound very much to quantitative researchers, but actually is quite a lot for a qualitative study, and fairly, well, as evenly as possible divided gender-wise, and that just gives you a breakdown. What I deliberately and purposefully included was people with communication or cognitive disorders. I was actually quite shocked in the literature at how many studies explicitly exclude anyone who's got a significant communication or cognitive disorder, and yet then findings are taken to apply to those people. So I wanted very specifically to include them. And it came up with, after analysing, a main finding was a spectrum of hope to despair, with a sort of doubting phase in the middle. And then there were 5 other categories. Making sense of what has happened was just, all the questioning that goes on for people, many examples there. Moving forward is that sense of, am I making progress at all? Not objective progress, not the clinician saying, on my assessment data, you've improved 1 point. This was whether the person had that subjective view of, yeah, I'm making progress here, things are moving forward. Self-efficacy came into this, as in a sort of, what can I do about it? Do I have power to change this? Trusting, doubting others. Do I believe that what the therapists do can actually make a difference or not? And then there was a very small category, acceptance. There was one client who was many, many years post-injury, who was the only one that fell into that. Because of the time, I'm not going to, I'll whiz through and just put a few quotes up, but because this was the main category, people who were hoping were saying things like, oh yeah, 100% I'm going to get better. But in the same interview, the same person would often then, and in fact this was the same person, would be saying, oh, I'm not sure actually, my mojo's not coming back, and it was as if they were trying to persuade themselves, yeah, 100%, definitely, but then little bits of doubt were creeping in as well. Many were trying to keep those doubts at bay. A lot of people saying, no, I won't go there, I won't think about that at the moment. And some, I just want to lie down and die is the quote here, of the 21 people, 3 explicitly expressed suicidal ideation, and that was, having never met me before, quite a personal thing. You wouldn't expect people to reveal that very soon, and yet 3 of the 21 in that initial interview did, or immediately after the interview, once I switched the tape recorder off, which was also interesting. So that was the main category. I don't think there's time to go through all these other quotes, but they're here if anyone wants me to go back through them. I've just got a few quotes from the various different categories and subcategories that I've found. You'll see there was the one person who said, I've got no delusions of recovery. So the model that I came up with and how it seemed to fit together was that hoping, doubting, despairing spectrum was directly feeding into that, sorry it's all got a bit unaligned there, were those 3 categories of, did people think they were making progress? Did they think they could influence it? There was some sense of self-efficacy. And did they think what other people did could have an influence? They seemed directly to impact on whether people felt hope or despair. And the other category just fed into that, and But this is a very dynamic model. I interviewed people at one point in time. I suspect that if I interviewed them at any other point through the rehab, they would have been in a different place. So someone who was hoping at the beginning, I wouldn't expect to be still hoping halfway through rehab and so on. So it's sort of, it's a model created from static data, but I would expect it to be a dynamic model. So then the model that I would like to go on and test out more fully is based on this sort of paradigm of the interaction between people's expectations of recovery or improvement alongside their expectations that rehab or themselves or both can have a difference. And hope is related, but not directly, to engagement. So here, if someone, I'm definitely going to make progress, and I really think that what I do and my therapy team can make a difference, they feel hopeful. And they're ready to engage. You can see why. If someone really doesn't think they're going to make much progress but thinks we can make a difference or they can make a difference, then they might be in the doubting or even accepting. My outlier was in this category, but he was ready to engage because even though he had no delusions of recovery, he did think that his life could be improved by the involvement of therapists and by what he might be encouraged to do. So he didn't feel hope in the same way, but he was still ready to engage. This group didn't think that therapy or what they did could make any difference at all, but they were still really hopeful because they just thought time would make a difference. You know, doesn't matter what I do, it's going to get better. So they were very hopeful, but not at all ready to engage. And the final group, feeling despair for obvious reasons and not ready to engage. So what I would like to suggest from this model, and I'd like to test it out, as I say more often, that I think the clinical implication of this is that we could improve engagement of our clients, not just in ABI, but in many areas, by addressing those underlying beliefs. And that might be through psychoeducation. So if someone, I had one client who said, we questioned, why don't you seem as if you're motivated? And she said, well, what's the point? She said, I've known 3 people who've had strokes and they've all died within 5 years, so why work so hard? Because she was absolutely convinced. If we explore those sorts of beliefs a bit more and gave education, we can maybe bring people more into an awareness of what they can do for themselves and with intervention. With despair, jumping straight in if someone's got those beliefs with therapy is probably not going to work. But if we address those psychological barriers first through CBT or motivational interviewing or something like that, perhaps we can change it and move forward from there. So that's what I'd like to go on at some point to look at. And these were my supervisors, so I always thank them and the clients and the rehab team that helped me with it.